and welcome to Game Master's Toolbox. I'm Jonathan Albin, Game Master with 50 years experience, and today we're going to be talking about telling stories. I have, over the last 50 years, been a nonstop Game Master, and there have been several times when I've considered why it is that I choose this hobby. And today I'm going to be going through some of the specific reasons why somebody would want to utilize storytelling. And as we do so, make sure you go down below and hit all the buttons so that the algorithm will know that you're part of our audience. And let's get after it.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame, our strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
Now, there is a bit of hubris when you talk about storytelling and then how important it is. And so I want to discuss actually why people tell stories. And there are a myriad of reasons, one of which is, of course, that stories are an easy way to convey information that is allegorical, that may have association with other facts, but give you an avenue for expressing what's going on within your life and therefore providing for the person that is the listener or the other participants an opportunity to interact with the facts of the case. So we're going to be looking at 10 specific ways that storytelling fulfills a part of our cultural contract. One of the biggest challenges in conveying information, of course, is the issue of importance. And while it may seem that a hobby such as role-playing is itself just a lark, there are a lot of reasons why the stories can have higher value, if not to just the storyteller, but also to the people with whom they are participating. Now, I've been doing this for 50 years, and so there are a lot of different kinds of conditions and cases that come up. But I think these 10 in particular will cover specifically how role-playing games in particular and storytelling in general can really assist in breaking down the communications blockage that has become natural in our culture. So the first thing that happens is that when you're telling a story, especially when you've done it for as long as I have, the players that you have in your games are perhaps younger than you are. And to be able to express things that hold value to you, you can generate a bridge, so to speak, between the current iteration of people, the current kids that are around, and the deeper meaning you might have to your story. I've had conversation with game masters who disdain sort of the concept of utilizing storytelling in this way, but I think that may actually only be a specific artifact of those independent groups. What I'm speaking of when I speak of bridging the generation gap is to explain the very nature of heroism, the adventure concept of the adventurer's story helps them to see the progression within the meta of the individual story and the progression of conditions in their particular lives. And I think that this is really kind of essential to a player to know that what they are interacting with is a new perspective, a different perspective, and gives them an opportunity to really sink their teeth into the deeper meanings that the game might have. Furthermore, when you're talking about telling a story, you're providing contextual clues to the players about your perspective. One of the reasons why I tell stories the way I do, and the reason why I've done it for as long as I have, is that there is something powerful in sharing information in a inoffensive, indirect way that perhaps makes the story have greater meaning to the players. There are, again, individuals who will have as a role-playing game just simply a lark and an energetic explosion of emotion and such. But when you were referring to a long tail game, quite often there's a deeper story within it that is almost necessary for the players to have an experience with, instead of just overwhelming them with simplistic concepts. Pardon me, you're providing them with context for their own actions in the real world, and by doing so through this less direct way, you're providing them with the tools to make those stories make sense. Another element of storytelling that actually focuses and makes our communications more effective is that you can introduce perspectives that the players may never have seen before. Whether you're talking about meta information like the relationships between individuals or the concepts of social contracting and interconnection, by using changed perspective and putting it in a fictional setting, you're providing them with an out, a way for them to consider the information without endeavoring to make it something about the current world. In other words, they can inoffensively look at these perspectives and consider the value of them for the player's own gratification and their own understanding. Of course, when it comes to the thrill or the excitement of an adventure, you definitely want to include some subversion of their expectations. If it always works like it always has, it would be an uninteresting story. So by providing them with, for example, perhaps a unique take provided by a monstrous source, then the players can consider what that might represent or what that might look like for themselves within the framework of the game that they're playing. For example, if you are speaking of a dragon, for example, and the players are interacting with the dragon and they find the dragon to be perhaps sad or misunderstood or something along that line, then you're providing the players with a surprising outcome from what they would have considered to be a more traditional source. And by doing that, you're allowing them to break out of the contract of communication and instead giving them an opportunity to feel what might be going on in the case of this other person, this other entity. And when you do that, you provide them with a different perspective than they might have seen otherwise, and therefore provide them with a really useful tool for comprehending the activity in particular. Now, it's also important to know that you can fundamentally take apart or disconnect a particular situation from a setting by undermining the agendas of the NPCs and of the characters in the story, and provide the players, therefore, the tools to redefine the very perspectives that you're wanting them to consider. This may seem deep. This may seem, more than the average persona might be prepared to engage with. But if your players are themselves attempting to see the deeper meaning in the story by creating and defining and then undermining these agendas, you allow their minds to be more malleable about what those stories might represent in real time. Also, when you're looking at a games group and a group of players, you want to provide some opportunities for them to get into the heart of something that they may not have been able to otherwise. And so you're able to, in your own storytelling, reveal your own vulnerabilities by transferring that to a monstrous creature or a non-player character. And they can actually then take apart the conditions and the situation and fundamentally deconstruct the story and therefore perhaps gain deeper meaning. Now, players who are used to a a short-term campaign, 3 sessions and done, probably don't delve into this. But when you're looking at a 6 to 7 year campaign, there's a lot of depth that can be pursued because you're providing them with a deeper pool into which they can dive and gather these pieces. And by doing it with vulnerability, you allow them to then identify and recognize those core conversational elements that you might have perhaps wanted to talk about but couldn't bring up in standard methodology, because the challenge of talking about things that are deep or personal, they're hard to actually embrace unless you can find a way to disconnect that from reality. And so the story is a really strong way to carry these vulnerabilities forward into the conversation without causing question or direct influence or pain. Also, when you are considering a conversation, sometimes what you think of in the story is itself irrational. It doesn't make any sense. But by putting it out there and exposing it to your players, the interaction can actually expose those irrationalities and therefore provide a feedback to you as a game master to say, okay, that didn't work, that was problematic, that didn't fit into the framework that you've built, and thereby allow you to set the leverage up so that the players can rectify it and provide you with a greater clarity. Having done the same story elements year after year and literally iteration by iteration, we've operated now into our 9th iteration. We've gone over a lot of these things and poked holes in the problems of the story and created new solutions that may not have been there before, because we've pointed out where the flaws are and fixed them within the framework of the game. And here's really what it comes down to. If you want to have a true conversation about the politics of the world or the conflicts that are going on in our real world, find ways to engage that conversation in your game. In other words, maybe you don't have the particular politics. Perhaps you don't want to draw any particular conclusions about that which is going on in your game. By engaging that conversation within the paradigm and framework of your story, you make it an inoffensive place for the conversation to be had, thereby being able to speak of those deeper subjects without actually addressing them. Now, from a worldview of storytelling, having these deeper conversations within the meta, it's really important that you can draw that conclusion and bring that back to the participant in some fashion. And that leads to what I call the Yasseetimmees. We've talked about this before, the concept that in the old Lassie TV show, you would have the old uncle who would put his hand on Timmy's shoulder and say, you see, Timmy, this happened for this reason. By being able to address indirectly the topics you want to cover within the framework of the game, you allow the players to consider alternatives they may not have otherwise. And without, it sounds patronizing to say Yasseetimmees, because I'm actually bringing the story to players who may never have had any other alternative experience. But what it does do is allows us to individually consider those positions within the story that make sense to us, and therefore reconsider all of the pieces that fed into it and allow for there to be a light bulb that goes on and go, oh, I get it now. Finally, when you are talking about a subject like this and you've gone into the deeper ends and your players are now wrestling with these subjects, you can now internally gather and offer alternative options both to the players within the story, but also to the player in the meta environment because they can now consider potentially other pathways than they might have otherwise. Now, this has perhaps been one of the biggest challenges because as time goes by, the framework by which players interact themselves change. The concept of the protected environment of the role player of today compared to the more vulnerable earlier periods really give the player the opportunity to see conditions in ways that they might not have otherwise. As my grandfather would say, I said all of that to say this. Stories are, by their own nature, invulnerable. And what I mean by that is that they are not carrying the burden of current and specific pressure or power that would cause the players to automatically defend themselves. What it does do is provides a way for the analysis to happen at the individual level, but more importantly, the interaction itself is prophylactic. In other words, it's a pre-conflict resolution. The idea is we provide tools within a role-playing game that allow for the conversation to occur without the edge and without the power. But what it does do is it does open the environment so the players can have a perspective that perhaps may not be favorable within the framework of the world. We find that we are able to connect with the story, even though we may not be able to connect with the allegory. So my question to you is, what have you found in your role-playing experiences that express this? How many times have you got into a situation and come out of the game going, that does make me wonder about other things in my life? I'd love to hear from you. Put in your comments down below how games might have affected your experience in life, and let me know what you think of this suggestion that we are able to actually break through the blockade of communication that has been fundamentally forced on us by this concept of one of us has to be wrong for us to have a conversation. I want to thank you for being here. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is Nikos RPG, and we will see you the next time. And remember, go play.